Good evening. Very welcome to another night lecture. I don't know what you think about the ambience, but I choose a warm yellow hue on the coloration here because it's not very late, but it's 8:20 in the evening. And I was mentioning these two neuroscientists, the pioneers in the area. The article is quite recent. The troublesome title of Neuroscience of the Yogic Theory of Mind and Consciousness. They are both renowned researchers at the greatest universities in the Ivy League, MIT especially, of course. And what they propose is rather incredible. They are looking to what we in the last lecture call the archeperception. What is before matter and perception? The beforeness, or something that is before both temporal and spatial. This is the true quantum mechanics. This is the true before of the Wigner-de Witt equation that's describing the world. It's trying to show that reality as we see it, material, often the realm for the empiricists and the reductionists, the like of Quine and Dawkins and Dennett, and the realm of the idealist, the so-called res cogitans, or mental realm, psychic realm, if you like. The realm of the idealists like Berkeley, and today we have actually a very modern proponent. His name is Bruno Kastrup. He proposed a sort of solipsism, idealism. This archeperception, if you like, goes before that and sees no distinction. It's seeing both strands emanating from one source, the beforeness of superposition, the observation, the experience, the after. Let me go into the mass of the text. I am currently at page 9 of 26. There will be a link in the description for you to follow the text as I read through. A little bit before the end of the lecture, which I won't make too long, I will put in a summary, and hopefully or possibly there will be one or two questions. And we were in the previous lecture, H360, talking about modulation. Modulation, I will give you some association. Think of Stimmung, think of the Gil-Christian attitude, or think of Alexander's posture. Mind wandering as modulation. We set our mind to a task at hand. Maybe reading this paper or doing some analysis, and the mind starts to drift. Some thoughts come up of the past, some imaginations about the future. We may think about what someone said, or imagine what one would do in a situation if it shows up. We all have observed the mind wandering, but the awareness of the wandering mind comes after the mind has gone off for some time. We suddenly realize that we have done nothing, done anything, not done anything, or probably missed out some parts of the conversations with someone. Why TMC considers mind wandering as modulation composed of vikalpa or imagination, which could be constrained or spontaneous. It is separate from smrti, which is remembrance of events, and from viparyaya, where the mind perceives and infers incorrectly. There has been recent attempts to study mind wandering, but still it is in its nascent stage. Current neuroscientific research on the mind wandering contextualize thoughts either generated spontaneously or deliberate and with constraint focused towards a task at hand. Frontoparietal control network can exert a deliberate control over the thoughts, but spontaneous thoughts are generated in the middle temporal lobe, MTL, subsystem of the default network, DN. The core network of the DN, comprising of posterior cingulate cortex and posterior inferior parietal lobule, automatically constrains the thoughts related to the individual. the activity of the brain during wakeful rest is found to be in two prominent states that corresponds to the modulations of memory, smriti, and imagination, vikalpa. Mind wandering is usually thought of as a noise in the mind, and behaviorally estimated out using reaction times and accuracy on task. But such experiments and studies ignore the state of mind wandering, an important aspect of the mind. When we understand that mind wandering and attention are modulations of the mind, it can help us design better behavioral experiments. Though the study of mind wandering is dispersed and there are no cohesive methods to detect when the mind wandered without probing, we believe that full neural correlates of consciousness would include both the neural correlates of attention and mind wandering. Internal states of yoga. The different states of mind and consciousness, according to YTMC, is listed in Table 1. When the mind is not in the 5 modulations, it is not seeking knowledge about the world, not engaged in self-referential processing, imagination, incorrect knowledge, sleep, or memory. the mind is said to be in the state of yoga. There are further states of dharana, dhyana, samadhi, and samapatti. The state of samadhi is further divided into sabija samadhi and nirbija samadhi. The latter is experienced after years of practice and is considered a goal for yogis and practitioners. But the former has nuances and subtle states within it. We look closely at each of these states and how TMC can model and experimentally investigate them. Buddhist literature also mentions the state of jhanas and jhana in Sanskrit, which are probably close or similar to the states described here as mentioned in the Yoga Sutras. But comparative studies across the two traditions are lacking. I have to add from Dr. Judy Spencer, who made extensive research into the different brain waves, that jhana or jhanas is closer to the slower waves, the gamma or the delta, whereas the ordinary with riti, with the dasman, or when you are occupied by living, is the faster pace. Or why not Susie Froebel, that showed that those thinking lines are less fractal, meaning less attentional and less understanding. A third parallel is, of course, the loop-like short-lived representations of the left hemisphere with empty concepts. Shadows of a reality that happened before. Internal states. Pratyahara is the process of taking the attention and the mind from the external sense objects to internal senses like proprioception and interoception, which allows the reduction of modulations and serves as a process to go into the finer and less perturbed states of dhyana and samadhi. Dharana, concentration, is another internal state where, through taking attention to a fixed location, the modulations of the mind are reined in. Different yoga and meditation practices have used various methods for dharana, including attention to parts of body, specific locations such as chakras or ganglions, sensations of body, attention to breathing, unbroken attention to a point, trataka, repeated chanting, all the subsystems of the mind and consciousness are active with attention to internal or external sense organs, and the modulations begin to reduce. Attention regions are active along with amplification signals to one of the senses. Default mode activity has reduced and disconnects with the attention network. I think also from the Master and his emissary, where it was mentioned about the rituals, ceremonies, chanting, prayers that was going on in the cloisters and abbeys before 61, 62. Gilchrist mentioned that after taking away the rituals, people got sick. They even died. The yogi's meditation is a complement, or even instead of sleep. It makes sense to think that the prayers, the chanting, the rituals of the cloisters were to clean the mind of these distortions, to make it clearer, more spiritual, calmer, and the body more healthy. My comment. Dhyana, or meditation, is the state achieved when the modulations have reduced, with only one content of the mind which is continuous and not changing. There is no impulse to act. The connection with the action organs is reduced. Other systems are active, but the mind is coming back to a singular content. We can think of it as an attractor state of a dynamical system. The attention network is still active, but the amplification of the sensory signals have decreased. The default mode system has reduced activity and decreased connectivity with the network and with attention network. Thalamocortical signals from the multiple demand regions of the thalamus have reduced the firing rate in the cortex. Alpha and theta power increase in deep states of meditation, and hemispheric band power synchronizes. Samadhi is staying in the state of jhana long enough that the content of the mind disappears. There can be thoughts, some logic, feelings of bliss and joy, sense of I-ness, but the mind has no continuous content. It's an equanimous state where there are no modulations, mind wandering, memory, or sleep. Default mode activity is low and disconnected. The attention network activity has also reduced, and the sensory signals are attenuated. Samapati is a trait feature that is achieved after practice for many years. Perception of the world is clear and the mind does not wander. There is no local sleep. Affective stimuli does not create strong memories. Experienced meditators and yogis stay in the state of samapati, where the default mode activity and connectivity with balance regions and memory regions is reduced. Asana or posture practice can also bring in a temporary state of samapati, wherein putting effort and letting go takes the mind temporarily to the state of samapati. states of samadhi. Samadhi has multiple nuanced states as mentioned in Table 1. We can first describe two types of samadhi. One, Sabhija samadhi. The states of samadhi with the seeds of ignorance. They are further divided into Sampragyat samadhi, state with awareness where one can observe spontaneous thoughts, special logic about oneself, feeling of bliss and joy, and the mind is established with a seer. It is further divided into Savichara with spontaneous thoughts. We propose that in such state the MTL subsystem of EN would be active. I refer to the list at page 15 for more details. And I go to consciousness, emergent or fundamental. The hard problem of consciousness, Chalmers, 1995, posits that understanding consciousness and finding the physical or neural correlates of consciousness is hard. The materialist perspective postulates that consciousness should be an emergent property which develops out of the complex computations in the billions of neurons that the human brain possesses. But the recent studies on corvids and other animals suggest that animals with an entirely different and much smaller brain structure can still possess consciousness, either different number or configurations of neurons. Can bring together a similar emergent property or circuitry required to bring emergence is not as complicated. I would put in a note here and get back into the summary into that, but just as you follow me here. The hard problem, it comes because Chalmers and others look at the after syndrome. And in the after shadow effect, there seem to be an observer and something observed, something mental, something physical. The distinction is put to be before when it's after. It's a not foundational distinction. That, of course, helps to make it a hard problem. And I think of Ludwig Wittgenstein here. The world is your attitude, your direction. We do not live in the same world. We are actively participatory in the construction of the world. And on my little note here, YTMC considers consciousness to be a fundamental property of life, but the mind to be an emergent process out of configuration of the sense and action organs. Higher order processes involves the intellect, ego, and memory subsystems, along with the mind, as different species possess different attributes of intelligence, sense and action organs. We can expect their internal faculties to have different properties as compared to humans, like Corvids. Engage nidopallium caudolateral in higher cognition, whereas mammals utilize prefrontal cortex for intelligent behavior. The separation between the neural correlates of consciousness and neural correlates of mind and other internal faculties can help us understand the specific role of these faculties to create a cohesive cognitive unit. Then what are the neural correlates of consciousness? We propose that general anesthesia and nirbhaya samadhi should have similar neural correlates, except the attention of mind toward the seer, as in nirbhija samadhi, and can help us find the true correlates of consciousness, which may not be localized to a specific region. But present as baseline processing of the brain akin to the theta oscillations in the hippocampus. General anesthesia, although easy to administer, cause chemical-based increase or decrease in GABA or NMDA receptors, whereas nirbhija samadhi comes through years of training and thus more natural and would involve long-term changes in the brain that can sustain the state closest to pure awareness and not affected by the modulations and activity of the mind. I think I put in a little summary here. I see many parallels here in this very brave project out on a discovery. And they are addressing a problem that's been lying dormant for almost a century. What does quantum mechanics do to consciousness? And it feels tempting, but this could actually be the solution of the hard problem, as Chalmers calls it. Many others, of course, after he named it. Making consciousness and the observer participation less cumbersome. Let me just mention a few reasons why the observer doesn't really fit until you do the adjustments here suggested. One is volition, voluntary. Observer dependent gives the indication, maybe if I want something to be, or I decide almost as I pinch a button or something, I can decide reality in a very superficial way. That's very hard to accept, and we know intuitively that not to be the case. But if the choice and the world are born at the same time, the world will correspond to your want or your will, the whole world. Because before there is neither world nor mind. And their solution is, there is the seer. Let's say it could be reflection in the theta or down in the gamma even. Waves that can contain a lot more information, where the jagged fractality make a more complex reality also. And this is something I've been thinking of for the left hemisphere. For the left hemisphere, everything is boring, because both the mind and what is observed is simple, of low fractality, less rewarding, giving less knowledge, having a very, very small content. Susie Frobel said, if you go down to the theta, you will make the complexion of your mind, the thing that's doing the readout, and the world maybe millions, billions times more complex and deep. Whereas the repetition of the left hemisphere and its pathetic substitute, the renaming, where you have the same concept, you rename it, or in an everyday situation you feel every day to be the same, boredom, and you rename the days and call them that specific day with that specific content. You see how everything lock up even in one's internal world. How this causes boredom, and the bored state is a passive state. It is specifically characterized by passivity. And I think we mentioned maybe 200-300 lectures before that theory comes from the word of theater, being a passive observer on the scenery. And this is what they were pointing to. Oddly, from that perspective, probably unbeknownst to my associations now, using scenery as well. They say the mind is engaged in the scenery. It is outward directed. thereby automatic, reacting to the stimuli that itself is propelling. It's in the theater. Engaged in the world does have that sentiment both in Heidegger and here. It is half passive, even if you do things. You do things in Heidegger would call it mindless way, but lack of attention then. You are not there. And it's a moral stance, it's not as pure. Remember the grasping. This is how I remember university, where complex thinking were reduced to something you prop your hand up quickly and give a short answer, almost like a machine gun, ridiculing the whole process of going deep into a subject. Left hemisphere, shooting bullets all over the place, no one really hitting, and afterwards, like the left hemisphere, always to ignore that there is something missing. McGilchrist always says the left hemisphere has two specific properties. It's one, it's being constantly angry and unsatisfied. The second one, it's an horrible liar. It's incapable of telling the truth. Patients with separated left and right hemisphere would deny even a body part that doesn't work anymore. And of course, they deny the very fact they have no access to the world, thereby perpetually inventing or reinventing the same thing and renaming it in the mind and saying, this is a new day, but it looks oddly like the old way. I think creativity has a role to play in this model of the very brave and interesting researchers Tripathi and Bharadwaj. Maybe a question would be come in handy here. Maybe some light as well here. There you go.
Wait, can you
check that you are in good view?
Good evening, good evening.
Wait a second there.
Good evening, good evening. So I continue and spin further. So what do we answer people who said that my observation doesn't change anything? So we could say that, like, this is my proposal. I'm sorry to say, but it's this, your attitude shows that your left side of the brain is dominating you. When your left side dominates you, everything is the same. We know that from neuroscience. That is, everything is same, not for you, but you also think that it's the same for everybody else.
Yes.
And instead the right side focus on differences. Another thing, and the left side thinks that everything is stasis, that is still, while the right side of the brain thinks that everything is a movement. So when everything is a movement, you are also inside in this movement. So you're participating in the world. So there is everything you are. You cannot separate yourself really from the world. So there is no point of saying that I cannot change the world since I'm already in the world. Like Heidegger said, you are already thrown into the world. So, so if your right side of the brain dominates you, you are seeing the world as different. as everybody else. So if the world is different from my world, is a little bit different than yours. That is different, not in a negative sense, but in that we see the colors, and when we add the movement, then we are active participants, like that. I could, in this paper they mentioned David Chalmers. I suppose I heard this name before, and this past year, 2022, he published a new book. I'm happy to say that the City Library has this latest book, Reality Plus, is the name of the book, Reality Plus. What is your thoughts about David Chalmers as a philosopher? He's Australian, like our, what is his name?
Graham Priest.
Graham Priest, thank you. They both the same side of the same coin, or?
I would say it was very good that he did post the problem, because he put pressure on the whole thing. It could be some obstacle to present a problem, because if you get into it in the left hemisphere way, it's unsolvable. But if it's out there and you think the quantum way, all of a sudden you see, first, very theoretically, left hemisphere way, this is the way I perceive it now, I don't sense it yet. But I see how it exactly fit the glove perfectly. Let me give you an example of how the left hemisphere works. When I first understood about fractals in the 90s, I saw the fern, the Unbugge. When you go down, you see the same patterns over and over again. And for mine left hemisphere inclination, I saw sameness and boredom. And I thought, it could be I don't even need to, I forgot, sorry. We don't even need to look down in the fern. A couple of years ago, I read again Gleich and also the book about fractals by Gribben. I realized it is sameness, but it's not exactly the same. There are iterations. So they are same in the difference and different in the same. For each layer you go down, you find a variation. And it was my mind stuck in the left hemisphere that became bored, liked it, because the left hemisphere liked boredom, but wanted to reduce the whole world. This is not how it is. And to put a little anecdotal thing here, in the deconstruction of Derrida of Saussure, he says there is not repetition, as Saussure says, there is iteration. For every time there is a difference, there is an iteration of something. It is not repetition, sameness and difference going on. It is iteration. And iteration sort of creates the world by making it more complex, not simpler, making it more interesting, delightful. And I think when I understood that, was actually a lecture we recorded outside a big bush of ferns. I will never forget that instance. I didn't notice them first, but it suddenly came to me, this is beauty. This is how the world becomes. By going each layer down in the fern, you find both sameness and newness, and beauty, and this complexity, I would say, is attention. I would stick so far with the suggestion of Susie Froebel that complexity is attention and understanding. Well, we'll see what this leads us. Thank you very much and have a very pleasant night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.